Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Cioffi here on this Thursday. And thank you, by the way, for those of you. I hope thank you for being here last night. I hope you enjoyed my colleague Joe Rayo. We always have a lot of fun, he and I, doing these live streams together. We didn't get a chance to do the Facebook last night. Got a little busy. But we'll see what happens tonight. I'm soloing it tonight as we look at the weather going into the weekend, and the weather pattern overall getting more and more interesting as every day goes by. There's so much going on in the atmosphere, keeping us very, very busy. And we're going to start off. I want to pull up the U.S. radar to kick things off tonight, because it is very busy out in the west. One of the things I've been having fun with is reading some of these forecasts out west, is particularly up in the northwest. I'm going to see if we have what they're going for up that way, because you get into some of these mountainous areas and you get to see some forecasts that are kind of you certainly don't see these kinds of forecasts in the east. So I'm pulling up Mount Shasta right now, which has snow in the forecast, and they're going for something crazy here. They've got winter storm warnings up for what it looks like 4 to 9, roughly 5 to 10 inches. Let me see what the actual warning says. Generally above 4,000 feet, and advisories below 4,000 feet. The snow levels out in the west have actually lowered somewhat. So we are, watching this weather system coming into the west, because it's kind of setting the ball rolling with regards to weather that we're going to be having here in the east before too long. Otherwise, it's pretty quiet throughout much of the rest of the country. By the way, excuse my nasalness here. Kind of woke up with it this morning, and it's been hanging with me all day long. So I'm not sure. Hopefully, it's not. I'm not revisiting my cold from last week. So here we have the watches and warnings that are up at the moment. Again, much of this with regards to the west. Looks like we have red flag warnings up for northeast Texas, Oklahoma, southern Kansas, and Missouri. Let me just double check and see what that's all about really fast. Up fire risk because of the very dry conditions there. Much of the nation right now on the dry side, but out west you've got a slew of winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories from the northern third of California on up through Oregon and Washington, and the bright blue that you see there, that's avalanche warnings that are up. My colleague Andrew Pinheiro is on right now, and he's also streaming. We're kind of streaming side by side. One of these days, Andrew, who's pretty savvy at this stuff, might be able to figure out how we can kind of stream together and maybe do it all on one channel. So that's, Andrew, if you're hearing me with this, we got to work on that. All right, so let me jump to the models now and talk about where we're going, because, again, a pretty interesting situation that is evolving for the weekend and into next week as we see the overall weather pattern doing its thing and undergoing its next round of changes and adjustments. As we've been talking about this for the last week or so, that we're going down this road after this relaxation period, and certainly when you look at the upper air, it doesn't seem to want to look like it wants to go back to that pattern we had from mid-December to mid-January. So the next big weather maker, in the west, we've got another low that's coming into the Pacific Northwest coast with rain and heavy snow, and you can see it there. A front, meanwhile, is pushing to the east, and a wave is going to develop on that front in the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. And every model run seems to want to bring this closer and closer to the coast. At the same time, we have a strong upper air trough that's going to be swinging around the Great Lakes. So it makes for a very complicated scenario. The late afternoon GFS actually brings this low closer to the coast than it has on any run in the last couple of days. And even beginning to show some snow on the northwestern side. There isn't a lot of cold air that's near the coast. The cold air is really with the upper trough that has to swing eastward, and that happens later Monday night into Tuesday, and you can see there's an area of snow that's produced throughout much of the eastern half of New York State, eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, down into the Delmarva Peninsula, and even into coastal Virginia, and then it translates to the coast. This is what's called a Norland trough, and that is something that you see sometimes on the northwestern side of a storm system. It kind of rotates from the northeast to the southwest, and as it rotates around, you can get an area of heavy snow with that. The problem is trying to forecast it. Norland troughs are highly unstable. They're crazy. You could have heavy snow and then just go to a handful of miles away, and you have barely enough for a coating. Forecasting for them is almost impossible until you get into the short range. So I'm not even going to attempt to do that. But going to be watching this coastal wave, however, and the impact of the trough swinging in the west, because this still probably has more adjusting to do. I think the low may wind up going further and further west. Here's the upper air view of this. You have a ridge in the west that's trying to build northward. You've got this trough that runs from west of James Bay south into Alabama and Georgia, and you can see how the GFS handles this as it tries to take that trough and swing it toward the east and cuts it off. It doesn't really lift it up, but rather just kind of progresses it eastward, because the upper ridge in the west gets crashed by a strong trough coming in to the west coast. So this is going to be a nail biter. So we're gonna watch this closely. Models some of the models are showing several inches of snow that we could get out of this, but just bear this in mind, that with these Norland troughs, you can, as I said, you could wind up with nothing. Somebody could wind up with 6 inches. You've got the GFS doing one thing. The European has the Norland trough in a completely different position, and the Canadian model doesn't even have the Norland trough at all. So, this is what you're dealing with here when you have these sorts of things. And I've seen models show Norland troughs up until the last minute, and suddenly they're gone. So there's not a whole lot of confidence in how this forecast is going to play out as we go on into next week. Now let me get back to the surface map. And so here we are after this whole weather system. You can see how a new low forms out into the Atlantic, well east of the Virginia coast, because of that upper air system moving eastward. And then we have another front with another wave on it for the end of next week. So, we seem to be getting these kinds of systems here with these fronts and waves developing on it. And the timing of the front and the wave, again, determines who gets snow on the back side of this. And the GFS is insistent on its view, which would be a several to 6 inch event for somebody from Delaware on up into Maine. But the timing of that wave and the position is important, because if we look at, I can't show it to you today, but the European model has the wave further north, where it basically brings the front through after the wave goes by, in which case you just watch. And by the way, as we look at the overall long-term upper air pattern, everything is on schedule here with regards to this pattern realignment that's going on. The deep trough here in the east for Monday into Tuesday that lifts out, and then you've got this deeper trough with an upper low vortex in northern Hudson's Bay that rotates around. You notice that there's higher pressures in the orange on both sides over Alaska and over Greenland, kind of enveloping this across the top, and weather systems just keep rotating around that upper low, which can't get out of the way. So that'll just mean cold air mass after cold air mass as it rotates around. This really does look a lot like what we had back from mid-December to early January. The question is whether the cold air that this is going to produce, and it's going to produce air that's probably colder than what we saw back in December, because the atmosphere this time of year is just colder than it was a month ago overall up in Canada. We're going to see, it's going to be interesting to see how much of that cold air and how far south it gets as this all plays out. But we're definitely going into a wintertime pattern returning. The devil's going to be in the details as we move forward. And in fact, let me just really fast show you the teleconnections from today, because we have been watching these on a day-to-day basis. And let me bring this to the top here, and notice, is this the right date? Okay, yes, it's January 25th. So you've got this PNA, a little bit of a change here. The PNA actually spikes to neutral, which is on the 29th. So this is for the system for early next week. The NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, goes slightly negative here at this point. And you can see it here. It goes slightly negative right around the 29th, 30th, 31st. This is while we have all this going on for Monday into Tuesday of next week. The EPO holds on to positive, kind of drops also to a sharp, a bit of a sharp drop to just under neutral around, again, the 29th, then a little blip positive, and then we've got that collapse that it goes sharply negative. One of the changes in the PNA today is the fact that toward the end of the period, the PNA yesterday was spiking back up to neutral. Now it's kind of starting its move up, but it's nowhere near an accelerated ascent like we saw yesterday. But that was off the 0Z run, which kind of tried to have a different look out in the west. One of the things the model's having trouble with on prior runs, and if we think back to when the December pattern was evolving, we were seeing the same thing. Occasionally on some runs, it wants to drop a trough into the west, and that kind of impacts how all this plays. But that seems to happen on a run or at most two runs in a row, and then after that we are back to the scenario where it doesn't drop the trough out in the western part of the United States. I'm having a lot of trouble here, folks, tonight. I'm really sorry. I apologize. My voice and my nasal condition are making it a bit tough for me. So I'm going to just jump on board with you guys and just take some of your questions. I think I'm going to cut the live stream short a bit. And Andrew Delvin's telling me that Andrew is still live. Andrew's a good guy. If you haven't seen his live streams, you should check them out on his YouTube channel. Andrew Pinheiro, Pineiro. Check out his live streams. He's very good. David Schwartz, well, we're going to have this model volatility if we get these model runs. Those teleconnection indices are coincident indicators. They're going to reflect whatever models are showing, and those were off the ensembles. And I would just tell you that we're gonna have this up and down motion with the night runs last night, with some of the night runs trying to show a little more troughing in the west at some point. That probably impacted the PNA, but on the other hand, you might have this run from late this afternoon, which doesn't do that, doesn't show much troughing at all in the west. We could see if we recalculate the PNA based on that, you would probably see the PNA being higher. So don't worry about that too much. We'll get there when we get there. The Icon model, the German model, does have a bullish scenario for snow for Monday. Actually, one of the things the German model does, and I'll go back to that right now. In fact, one of the things the German model does, I can't see the 500, but I can guess what it did. let me just bring this forward here. Oh my. The German model on tropical tidbits, by the way, is called the Icon model, in case you're interested in it. You know what, folks? If you give me a break for 1 second, I'm going to run out and see if I can. There's no tissues in here, and they would really help me if I could have. I should have. Didn't think I was going to need them. But give me 1 second here. Stand by, and I will be back in a moment. Okay, that helped. I got myself some tissue, so that'll help me out here. All right, so let's go to the German model here, the Icon model from late this afternoon. And one of the things that it's doing, here's that weather front that comes through. It really doesn't do much with it, but then you can watch that low that comes out of the Gulf of Mexico and then runs up the East Coast. It's much closer to the coast. Look what it does with all this snow that it suddenly develops here during that's 9Z Monday. So this is early Monday morning, during Monday morning through Monday afternoon into Monday night, as that low tracks not that far offshore. So it gets to about 38 and 70 or so, and it produces quite a bit of snow. What the German model is doing is that it's pivoting that upper trough a bit faster, so it gets completely involved with this lead low that comes out. That is something that's different from the other models, where they're sort of keeping that southern stream system out a little bit further to the east, and the upper trough doesn't really interact with it. Here, there's much more interaction with that upper trough, so we have to watch the timing of this in terms of what the outcome will be. And here's the, just to match it up, this is the German model, and now I'm going to bring up the GFS for the same time, and you can see how much further east. Here's the Icon, way to the left of the GFS, and there is the GFS. So that's a very important distinction here, because the GFS's model run with the low that far out to the east. The upper trough with this that's coming down and swinging down from the Great Lakes, as we take a look at that, is still pretty far to the left. I don't have an upper air to show you from the German model. That's not available. But I will show you the difference here with regards to how the models handle this trough on Tuesday morning. There's the GFS. You have the trough right on the coast, and you can see there's a closed circle there in central PA. That's an upper low that's closing off there. The European, on the other hand, has a system that's a little less pronounced. The trough is weaker, much more open in nature. The Canadian model also has more of the idea of the European. The GFS, for a change, seems to have a much more well-developed upper air, and I would suspect that the German model upper air would be very, very similar. Let me see if there's any kind of, because do we have, what do we have here? All right, so here's the Icon model for Tuesday. So let's go back. So here's the upper air for 18Z on Monday. So we do have this 500 millibar good. So there's the trough on the Icon model, and here's the trough on the GFS. The Icon has a much more defined shortwave trough that's swinging through here, and it definitely has a much deeper look to it than even the GFS does, and the GFS winds up being deeper than the other three. I'm sorry, the other two, the Canadian and the European. I'm really sorry. I'm here blowing my nose in the middle of my weather live stream. You know I don't plan these things, okay, folks? It's totally ad-libbed. I had to do that. So, look, we're going to pay attention to this as we go into Friday and the weekend. Obviously, this winter is keeping us on our toes with regards to the kind of weather we're dealing with and these weather systems. So, always always fun and always a challenge. How good is the German model, Danielo Jakubov? I'm just starting to work with it now. It hasn't been too bad, but I want to give it some time before I reach any kind of conclusion regarding how good it is or it isn't. But it's very interesting that it's doing what it's doing. And remember that for the last couple of months, these coastal weather systems have been adjusting to the west. So don't be too surprised if if it winds up going it continues to go in that direction. One of the tricky parts of this is the fact that the amount of cold air is rather tenuous. If the upper air trough does get involved with that coastal system, it may make cold air more important, and that's something we're going to have to pay attention to. The German model, I think, does seem to take the low close to 40 and 70 as it moves out to the northeast. But we're going to have to get the cold air back in here because temperatures are going to make a run for 50 on Saturday in many locations. So just bear that in mind. Never fun. All right, folks. You know what? I'm gonna cut it short tonight. I'm not feeling 100%. So let's. I'm gonna end it here. Okay, Dio, I'll get your question. What do your consensus of Monday storm? A lot of models will shift west. I think that westward shift is already started. With the GFS certainly leading the way. So I think we're gonna see the shift a little bit further to the west. So let's pay attention to what the NAM does now. It's getting close to the NAM's range, and the NAM was pretty far to the left on the 18Z run, even though it's not out far enough. But in terms of where it is across the Gulf states and what's going on there and in the southeast, it looked like it has precip further north and west. So we're gonna pay attention to that. So the NAM run, the NAM run starting tonight will give more clues, but during the day tomorrow, that NAM run is going to become more and more important. All right, folks, I'm going to call it a night. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Thursday evening.